Order, order. Welcome to the Environmental Audit Committee for our final session on decarbonising the economy. We're very pleased to welcome back to the committee the Right Honourable Graham Stuart, the Minister for Energy, accompanied by two officials from Ofgem, Emily Bourne and Eleanor Warburton. Could I just ask the Minister might want to say one or two opening remarks. We're aware, and then we'll introduce the other members in the panel can explain what they do for Ofgem.
First thing to say is Emily doesn't work for Ofgem.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Works for the department. I am sorry. Yeah. Well, perhaps you could introduce what Emily's role is, or Emily could.
Emily, I'll let Emily do it. She's very well connected.
Thank you. Emily Bourne, Director for Energy Systems and Networks in the department.
Thank you.
And Eleanor Warburton, so I do work for Ofgem. I'm a director over there. I cover essentially energy markets and system operation.
Thank you very much. So, Minister, this morning the Secretary of State made a speech in Chatham House and issued a written ministerial statement which is directly relevant to our inquiry. And I wonder whether you could just start by giving us the sort of top-line messages that she was getting across and what that will do to help secure the electrification of the grid, and well, we've got an electrified grid, but the energy supply and security for the
Thank
future.
you, Chairman, and thank you to the committee for your continuing interest. As you know, we have an ambition to decarbonise the electricity system by 2035, even as the economy becomes more reliant on that electricity system. To do that, we've been very successful to date. We've gone from the dire inheritance in 2010 with less than 7% of our electricity coming from renewables to a point where we're pushing towards 50% and upwards. The tools that we've used to get there, like the contracts for difference, which has now been copied by administrations around the world, have helped drive that, and we believe has a vital part to play going forward. But we need to make tweaks, because as we move from the 40% of renewables to higher amounts, we are going to have to make sure that we have a system that's fit for purpose and better aligns the incentives of generators with the system overall. So that's why we're looking at CFDs, maintaining them but improving them. Why we are looking at locational pricing. We've ruled out this second consultation having that kind of hyper-local nodal system, but that we do believe there could be a role for zonal. So rather than having hundreds or thousands of points with different prices, you might have a much smaller, perhaps single-figure number, as is the case in a number of other European countries, so that you incentivise generation closer to where demand sits, thus reducing the network requirements in order to deliver it. We, as part of moving to more and more renewables, we still have to balance the grid, and therefore one of the messages in today's consultation is that we do think we will need to extend existing gas power stations and have new gas power come on, able to be converted to carbon capture usage and storage, or indeed hydrogen in future. But although gas may be used less and less often, it's still there as an insurance backup, and we make no apology for ensuring the lights stay on, because we really have transformed our system so far. Going forward, it's going to be a really fascinating task, and what this REMA work in great deal of detail is looking at is how precisely we should create the framework of incentives within the system to drive that change and allow us to continue to be where we are currently, which is the country which has cut its emissions more than any other major economy on Earth.
What is the profile of the life expiry of the existing gas generating stations? And so how many are you anticipating either life extending or building new ones?
Yeah, and this will be something we'll learn more about as part of this second consultation, but more than half of the existing gas generation is expected to reach end of life before 2035. At the same time, we're expecting, of course, 50-60% increase in electricity usage between now and 2035. So it's in that context that we are sending out this signal to the market today.
And are you saying that it's the intent of any new gas coal-fired power stations, that they will, if I understood you correctly, that they will be obliged to be capable of being converted into an alternative fuel system.
Correct, and we look forward to, we will be coming forward with regulations to help support that, so that although new gas generation may be necessary, and I know that sounds counterintuitive on our road to net zero, but actually it's very much about ensuring that we have the balance in place and is complementary to and supportive to our continuing to decarbonise the power system by 2035, which is our aim.
I know you don't have direct responsibility for nuclear because that falls under another minister, but we heard the director of GB Nuclear on the radio earlier this week saying that there will be no possibility of small modular reactors achieving generating capacity before 2035. So at the same time as we're going to be losing half the gas generation, there will be the nuclear fleet is also being withdrawn from life, reaching the end of its life. Does the model allow for both of those things to I mean, i.e. very little, a declining nuclear capacity, declining gas capacity? How can you ensure that we're going to keep the lights on during that critical period?
Well, we are. I mean, the heart of everything we're doing is the growth in renewables, and we saw just a couple of weeks ago the largest ever budget for the Contracts for Difference, and we are going to continue to ramp up our renewables. And we're also doing long duration energy storage technologies, whether it's pumped hydro, whether it's grid scale, lithium ion and other technologies. We support those to bring those forward, but we are confident, without over specifying into the 2030s exactly which technologies are most competitive, that we will be able to continue this remarkable transformation that's happened since 2010 while keeping the lights on. And as the rest of the world follows us on net zero pathway, the aim is that we come out of this with competitive electricity prices, decarbonised, so that we not only support jobs and investment in this country, but we attract far more to this country because we are a world leader.
Do you think there's any credibility in supposed plans from others to decarbonise the electricity system by 2030?
I'm not sure the people who suggest that are serious, because it doesn't seem to be that it's even technically possible unless you start to have blackouts. Perhaps that's the plan. But if you were to, if you say you're going to do it and then you withdraw your commitment to the money which you say you need to do it, but still stick to saying you'll do it, you've got yourself into a bit of a hole. And that kind of irresponsible approach. It was irresponsible before, whether 28 billion was added to everyone's taxes every year or not. It's even more irresponsible now when the means are not available.
Others might want to come in on that later. You've introduced some recent reforms last autumn to the connection regime to accelerate connectivity of new renewable projects. We've had evidence in our inquiry suggesting that in particular the milestones will not be enough to achieve the kind of transformation to connection times which the industry that's keen to invest are looking for. Do you agree with that?
Well, as I said, we're expecting annual electricity demand to go up significantly, and finding my place here. And as of the end of January this year, the equivalent capacity of all accepted offers in the GB electricity connections queue was 675 gigawatts, over double the amount actually required to be on the system in 2035. And the current total includes 204 gigawatts of energy storage, 179 gigawatts of solar, 120 gigawatts of offshore wind, 44 gigawatts of demand, 32 gigawatts of onshore wind, 25 gigawatts of interconnectors, and 11 gigawatts of nuclear. And it's true to say that the efforts, and we've seen significant movement already, since November, the actions set out in the Connections Action Plan have led to more than 40 gigawatts of energy projects being offered earlier connection times than they previously had. So we're making a significant move, but the queue is still growing at an alarming rate. So that is why the Chancellor laid out further action points in his budget, and why we're committed to working across the system in order to bring further improvements and deter projects which have no realistic chance of seeing the light of day.
Have any projects been withdrawn as a result of those changes?
Yes, they have. Maybe I'll turn to Emily.
I think that what the process is happening at the moment is the ESO is inserting milestones into all the existing contracts. There then needs time, obviously, for those milestones to play out. So we would expect potentially projects to start being removed later this year as they fail to hit those milestones.
Can you illustrate for us can you characterise those milestones?
So it'll be project development milestones, so planning consents and so on. So, to show that the project is actually making progress and will be ready to connect when the date comes up.
Do they include land rights?
Sorry, after you, Chair.
Do they include securing land rights?
Yes, I think they do. I'd have to check exactly, but another action that's being looked at by Ofgem at the moment is a letter of authority from the landowner being required before you can even join the queue. So that's something Ofgem are currently looking at including.
And the Ofgem is reviewing the regulatory framework for connections and will make recommendations by the end of June of this year to ensure strong incentives are in place for network companies to deliver timely connections and excellent customer service as well.
Is the primary government tool to provide support to these projects success in the contracts for difference auction or other government supports to any of these different energy mixes? And if it is primarily contract CFDs that are being used, you've now moved to an annual cycle for CFDs, having had a failure in the last cycle. Can you sort of explain to the committee what gives you confidence that the next one is going to work?
Well, I wouldn't accept the characterisation of a failure. The last CFD round, actually on an annualised basis, was the largest we've ever yet had. It happened not to have offshore wind, where the economics had moved. There's always a window we set each year. One of the reasons to moving to the annual basis was precisely the fact that you can't. We do not want to overpay, and yet we do want to get the generation. And what's been remarkable about the CFD system, which we introduced, was that it has helped reveal those prices. So that £120 plus per megawatt hour for offshore wind in 2015, just 2 auctions later, had come down to £39.50. No one, the greatest enthusiast for offshore wind, predicted that you'd see that kind of transformation. So that's the system, and we've stuck with it. We didn't get any through in that particular window, but we've listened, crunched the numbers, maintained the same basic methodology, but we're confident, and the industry tell us that they feel they've been listened to, and that the window that we created this time is not only more generous than ever before, but actually appropriately aligned with the real costs in the real world.
Does the sort of annual cycle help or give everybody confidence that there is a timetable to which they work, or does it hinder development of projects? So we've had evidence from, Sir John Armitt has pointed out that he thinks there are delays over 2 years for long-term energy storage type projects, hydrogen projects, which he thinks is, there's some delay in decision making within government, which is leading to these delays, which adds cost and uncertainty to projects.
I don't know precisely to what Sir John was alluding, but clearly the development of carbon capture and storage, which is vital, the development of hydrogen, requires in the early days, just as with offshore wind, we had to seed and bilaterally develop the industry to get to the point where we could move to auction. That is an expensive project. We saw 20 billion announced for CCUS last year. We've seen the first hydrogen allocation round. Clearly everyone, not least within my department and myself, would always like us to go faster, but it has to live within the financial resources that are available. But we are moving quickly, and I think on a comparative basis, we are leading Europe and arguably the world.
We had some evidence that when we visited the National Grid Control Centre of a way to accelerate. I think Chris had a question on it.
So at the moment, the rules permit a developer to connect themselves to a substation over a relatively short distance. Beyond that, the work has to be done either by National Grid or by the regional distributor. The suggestion from within the industry, put to us informally, was actually if we allowed competition in that, for example, allowing major construction firms to do the work on behalf of the developer in the way they are allowed to over a short distance, it would dramatically speed up the issue of the queue. Is that something you've looked at? Is that something that could be done? And is there a reason why it can or can't be done? I'd direct this at both you and at Eleanor from Ofgem, if I could.
Well, perhaps I'll let Emily answer it first.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm aware of the suggestion that you put across, but I'm afraid I would have to come back on whether it's something we're actively looking at. We're definitely happy to actively look at it, especially if it's being proactively suggested by the industry.
So I can certainly add a little bit more. There are, as you say, there are some options for self-build nows and different models. So as you say, there are up to a point the developer can build themselves. You then have these things called independent networks, so IDNOs, ITOs, where a third party can take over the build in some circumstances. So there are models on the table, and we do see some of that happening now. We are looking with a number of particularly individual cases where developers are keen to go further and companies are keen to go further, how far we can push that. The two key factors I guess we keep in mind on the other side of the table are, firstly, it is important it forms part of a coherent, reliable network, so we have to make sure it can, connect in the right way at the right standards and so forth, and there has to be a clear, accountable long-term owner for that network. So you do not want to end up in a situation where somebody is connected down a wire and then in some point in the future the reliable ownership and maintenance of that wire comes into question. But there are absolutely a number of models, and I think a number of really interesting, innovative approaches coming out of industry around how they can be used.
Is there any reason why you could not have a trusted trader approach that said, because at the moment, if you think back to the history of telecoms in this country, we started with a monopoly that was slow, ponderous, and didn't really deliver anything very fast. We're sort of not far away from that situation now. Having a trusted trader approach where you had a list of 20 or 30 companies that were deemed to be sufficiently reliable to do this?
It's essential. So fully agree. The fundamental question is the long-term ownership of the wire. So essentially you can get a license as an IDNO, as an ITO, to show that you are the company responsible for the permanent maintenance and ownership of that wire. So that's the bit. I think finding people able to build it is perfectly credible. A lot of this work is outsourced even by the major network companies. Mm-hmm. It's just making sure that 50 years down the line, when that line is still in use, it is fit for purpose and it's very clear where responsibility lies for it.
Last point, if it's a dedicated line for a single facility, for example, for a single solar farm, yes, to connect that solar farm to the local substation, from the point of view of the network, if the solar farm goes bust, all you need to do is flick the switch and turn it off.
Exactly.
So it shouldn't, if it is a dedicated line connected a single facility to a substation, what you described should not be a problem as long as the solar farm is willing to take responsibility for that link.
So in essence, yes, as ever, case by case, a lot of it comes down to case by case, but in principle it can happen. In principle we're very open to it happening, and there are a lot of cases where it does happen.
It's something that can be accelerated, because if we're going to sort out the queue, that seems to be a way in which the queue could be sorted out.
It's certainly one part of it, yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Drew Mayhew.
Thanks very much. Minister, I'm going to kick off about planning and just have a little bit of a discussion as to the development of our planning policies and whether they've gone far enough. We all know as elected politicians that there's a balance here. On the one hand, we want to have an infrastructure that's constructed very quickly, efficiently, cost effectively to help us with our net zero transition. On the other hand, the last thing we want is to have pylons going through our constituency because residents hate it. And I've got skin in the game, as the Minister knows, with Offset, which is a group of Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex members of Parliament who are campaigning around the proposed pylon route from Norwich South down to through Suffolk and then Essex. So this is real-world stuff. And you've recently updated the National Planning Policy Framework, and you've updated the National Policy Statement on Energy Infrastructure. Can you collectively give me your thinking on whether those have gone far enough, whether it's a step in a process of development of policy frameworks? How would you characterise it?
Thank you for your excellent question. Basically, we're moving to this. We haven't built out networks and systems on this scale since the 1950s. So we are, as you, Mr. Mayhew, know particularly well, in a sense, playing catch-up. That's where, partly out of the offset MP's concerns, we came forward with bespoke proposals around that, but also the holistic network design process. We are looking to move to a strategic spatial energy plan, which will be developed by again, another change is to take the electricity system operator currently within National Grid, as we made provision in the Energy Act last year. That will come out of that. It will become the national, rather than electricity, energy system operator, combining gas and electricity. And we are looking to commission initially the ESO, which will become the NESO, to produce that strategic spatial energy plan. That will help provide the more strategic joined-up guidance alongside the factors you already mentioned. We've fully revised the energy national policy statements following consultation, and in addition we've made a very active programme of reform set out in the British Energy Security Strategy, the Nationally Significant Infrastructure Projects Action Plan, and the consultation on operational changes to the NSIP system. So we are right across the piece, making changes and reforming and seeking the regulator and other players in the whole system to look to change what they do in order to deliver in the most coherent and joined up way with the least imposition on communities we can manage. But at the heart of all this is we are creating new points of generation in a completely rewired system, just as we did originally to create the wealthy society we are today. We're doing it again in the green transition. Inevitably, notwithstanding the best efforts in the world, you are going to have to build network infrastructure, and it can't all be offshore and it can't all be underground. So you are going to have to, we are going to have pylons running through virgin countryside, which will not be popular with those who live there. That is a necessity. As a part of what we're doing, what we're seeking to do is listen to those communities. We've come forward with consultations around community benefits, precisely to recognise the imposition that we're making, and are seeking across the board to improve the system so that we can look those communities in the eye and say we have done everything possible to minimise, find alternatives that are cost-effective and reasonable, that balance the various pressures while taking really listening to the voices of local communities and seeking to ensure that their voices are heard. And we can see the democratic process in action because members of Parliament like yourself and others in the east of England and elsewhere are standing up to make sure those voices are heard and are challenging me and other players in the system to make sure that their communities can be assured that everything is being done to minimise negative impacts and recognise their concerns.
Consultation has been given a bit of a bad name in the past because the consultation has too often been characterised as you're going to get it, do you want it left a bit or right a bit? And people, where they don't have confidence that the design and planning process has fully taken account of both their views but also the development of technology, the development of this new and evolving and fast evolving requirement and system, they don't have confidence that the experts have done their job properly, then the local consent, albeit grudging, is absent. And the risk we all have there is it gums up the whole system in delay and going over the same areas twice and then having judicial reviews. So given the risk of that and to some extent the history of that, are you confident that the new structure of planning policy frameworks and all the other wonderful acronyms you spouted at me have got you to the right place, or do you foresee that there will be further development in the months and years to come?
I think this is an evolving landscape, but we need to build this infrastructure. We can't wait for new technologies which magic it away, but we're seeking, as I hope has been your experience as one of those concerned representatives, that we are engaging, listening, working, bringing in players in the system to make sure that people do feel that their voices are heard. And, I think the system as a whole will get better. As a constituency MP myself and out with this area, I've had, engineers going into a hall with 300 anxious people and turn them into 300 apoplectically furious people. Organisations need to learn and must learn how to talk to people, how to share and be honest and open, and make sure they don't, if they spin something too much one way and it turns out not to be exactly the case, then they lose trust. So somehow getting the balance right where you are sufficiently confident in what you're talking about and authoritative, and yet don't overstate, because you only have to make one mistake and people start to question everything. And I recognise the fact that that thread can be pulled and undone.
Emily, we've been talking a little bit about the nationally significant infrastructure project, fast track work. How will that link in with the critical national priority infrastructure? Are they going to work well together? How's that?
It's a good question. So DLUC have been piloting the fast track process. One of the characteristics of it is that more complex projects aren't necessarily well suited to that process. So for electricity networks in particular, one of the things that we've been looking at following the Networks Commissioner's recommendations is how can we make networks projects comparatively more simple than they are at the moment. So remove some of the complexity and some of the bespokeness that you get of different projects at the moment. Make it a bit clearer to communities what areas are actually up for grabs and what aren't, so that we can have a more meaningful conversation.
Foresee, renewables projects and grid infrastructure projects, could they fit within that system?
Potentially. So I think, that's one of the questions that we're working through is how do you make
something which is inherently complex
more simple? So I think on the network side, one of the actions that came out of the package that we published in November was to work with industry to develop design principles for electricity networks, so to make it more standardised across the piece rather than have different approaches being taken in different circumstances, and be clearer, hopefully make it a smaller set of choices.
One of the feedback the committee has received in the written evidence has come from district councils, planning authorities, where they're saying at the moment they've got an upper limit of 50 megawatts for onshore generation that they're able to put through their planning process before it has to go off into a nationally significant infrastructure project, which has been described as a hammer to crack a nut. Is there any thought being given to increasing the number, so increasing the 50 megawatts to something higher? And might that be a successful way, a quick way of speeding up these projects?
Well, there are issues with the capacity within councils. So if we were to see a great number more projects going to the councils, then the issue there. So across the whole system, one of the issues has been about capacity and trying to understand sort of on the critical path that every bit has to have that capability. So that is something that we have looked at and continue to look at, but the arguments cut both ways, frankly.
It's surprising if the national body representing those planning authorities has made this suggestion. It's surprising that they would do that if they felt a lack of confidence in their ability to supply that expertise. Is that the evidence that you've received in the department, Emily, that they're not capable of dealing with bigger projects?
There's definitely a concern about capacity across the whole of the planning system with the amount that's coming forwards, particularly in the energy sector, but I suspect in other sectors as well. I'd be less cited on that. So it definitely is a concern that councils can struggle if they get a number of these different projects. But
is your concern,
yeah.
you may not feel that you want to answer this, I don't know, but is your concern that they don't have the capacity to deal with, let's say, a 75 megawatt project, or is it your concern that a bit of too much local democracy, not seeing the bigger picture, they might say no to something you want to say yes to, or even, dare I say it, a bit of central government thinking local government isn't up to it? Is there some of that in there?
I wouldn't say so. I think you've got to draw. I think it's appropriate to draw on the line somewhere, and there are arguments on both ways as to whether that should be increased. I've certainly seen submissions coming to me suggesting, capturing information from various places and looking at the numbers and the impacts, trying to model that through. So I don't think there's any. I would hope there was no sort of central government knows best. It is about trying to find the most appropriate system. In my department, we're focused on making sure that we can have the planning system move quickly so that we can get this infrastructure built. So I can assure you that if we thought there was a great deal of capability and to do that locally, then we're certainly open to looking again at those numbers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chair O'Connor. No, sorry, Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. I want to focus, Ms Warburton, on governance and the relationship that you and the government will have with the National Energy Systems Operator. Before I do, can I just one thought to the Minister on what he was discussing with my colleague Jerome Mayhew, and that is the capacity that is there to make these pylon routes much more acceptable to the public by landscaping, by creating biodiversity corridors that would enable greening of the pylons from local communities and the creation of a local nature resource in conjunction with local nature partnerships. The cost differential is huge. We know that. The overground to the underground is between 4 and 10 times, I think, as costly if you want to underground those cables. But I just wonder what consideration the department's given to working to ensure that we can do this in a way that local communities are much more accepting of it, but also it meets our biodiversity commitments, it reduces carbon in other ways through the planting process, and it would be a lot cheaper than being forced to underground.
Well, that's why, as well as for network infrastructure, as well as £1,000 a year, up to £1,000 a year for those close to transmission, new transmission infrastructure over the first 10 years. We're also looking at, I think it's £200,000 per kilometre if it's above ground, 40,000 if it's underground, to be used by the local community precisely to do that sort of thing. So that's providing some of the resource. But I entirely agree with you, Mr. Gardner, that sometimes people, because they think in very large numbers, you've got to go and listen and hear the specific, the local, and if you show that you genuinely listen and you come up with more flexible approaches, people are much more accepting because they feel genuinely heard rather than just talked at.
Okay. Well, we've got one out there. Ms Warburton, I want to ask you about the NESA, the National Energy Systems Operator. This summer, it's going to be up and running. And it's going to be responsible for a huge number of things. And it's going to be advising both you and the government. Number of questions here. First, who's actually in charge? Second, how is the new approach to governance going to help deliver enough electricity to consumers in a net zero future, which is the basic intent of all of this? How is it going to do that? And given that it's going to be responsible for not just the sort of strategic planning of networks that the Minister was talking about earlier, but assessing the security of supply, the resilience of the system, as well as the existing obligations on balancing the grid and moving electricity around the UK, does it actually have too many responsibilities to be able to cope with all this in the time that we need it to be able to deliver?
Quite a few questions there, so
Yeah.
I will try and pick them up. But I think, if I may, I'll actually start with the last. So I am certainly very mindful, and I know my colleagues over in the department are very mindful of the burden placed on the NESO, particularly in the first few years. There are, frankly, there is an enormous temptation to treat it as the sort of, the solve-all for everything and give it every job going, and I think we have to be very careful about that. But the roles it is taking on day one come very inherently from its role as system operator. So right at its heart is, as you say, that real-time operation of the system, sitting there managing the flows. Its advisory functions in terms of system spatial planning and network planning, and those are ultimately advisory, come directly from the knowledge it brings from those. So I think they are a very logical and sensible build out to it. There is an overwhelming rationale to put them in that organisation, and I think it is that rationale that leads you then to the creation of it as an independent system operator. To pick up who's in charge, so it will be a public sector corporation. Government will be the sole shareholder, and it won't be profit distributing. I won't speak for government on this, but my understanding is their intention. It should be arm's length in day-to-day matters. It will be regulated by Ofgem for a couple of key purposes. The first is, at the moment, its funding flows through a price control. It goes on consumer bills. That model works very well. It brings some industry accountability, and we saw no reason to change that, so we will regulate it for its core funding purposes. And again, this is common across we had a good look at international models. This is common across most if not all of them. There does remain a need for regulation for accountability, so a licence setting out clear obligations with routes if those aren't met. Again, that will continue to sit with the regulator as it does now. Apologies. I'm trying to remember your last question, and I think
you answered the last question first. I think you said
that's probably why. I think your third question there was essentially about the benefit and the impact of it. Yeah. I think
will it deliver in time?
So I think its critical roles are going to be around delivering the spatial plan, and then from that the strategic network plan. I do think it's critical it becomes an ESO for those. I do not think you could ask a commercial company owned by a network company to do that in the same degree. And bringing both of those forwards, I do think will complete a really profound shift in how the energy system is developing. And if you want to, as the Minister has said, transform at real pace, you need a coherent single set of plans on which everyone is acting against, because then you can be quicker, you can be more coordinated, you can minimise impact on the ground by making the smartest choices. I think it will absolutely deliver those products. I think for the network, I as regulator, and for the other products, the department have to accept it is then our decisions on what we do with them that will also impact whether it brings the benefits.
In those advisory roles that it has, and you say they flow naturally from its more executive roles, when you or the government disagree with the advice, which you are perfectly entitled to do, what happens?
So for the network, if I may, I'll talk to the network plans and then perhaps ask the department to speak for themselves on the other. So we've had the first network plan from the system operator, the holistic network plan. We will see another stage in that process, the next stage of network planning coming later this month, and then there'll be another more comprehensive one in a couple of years' time. So this is going to be an iterative purpose. But I think the first one sets the model for the future. We receive the plan, we assess the projects under it, we then take a decision on whether we are content to approve network funding for those projects. What we did for the first one and will continue to do is make sure we are closely sighted with how that plan is being developed as it goes along, so that one, we can take those decisions very quickly. One of the key things we need to do is make sure we're approving network planning at pace so it can then be built at pace. And we will be extremely transparent. All of these documents will be published, our decisions and reactions on them will be published. But most importantly, the methodology, I know this is incredibly boring and technical, but all of the data inputs, the methodologies, the approaches, all of those things will be clearly defined at the start. So it will be very clear how that process will unfold and what will drive each decision that is taken.
Right, I welcome transparency, and I think that's grand. But I mean, this is not something I think that you'll understand that the public are going to even be aware of, never mind go and fish out the documents and find them for themselves. I just feel that I'm still not clear what the oversight arrangements are here and who's in charge of whom. And that's what I'm really trying to get to the bottom of. The Minister is indicating he wants to come in, but is there anything else you want to say before he fills that gap?
I would never stand between. I think the one thing I would say is fundamentally the department's role is to set energy policy. So targets, standards, the overall direction for the country. Ours is to regulate the sector and in this context, but crucially, unlock the funding for network build and make sure that is spent properly, and if networks don't deliver against it, they're held accountable. The NESO's role in this is to take from their technical insight that they are getting from the system and to give us very transparent, credibly worked up plan or plans on which we can then make those choices.
And you said to me that you want to be involved in that as it proceeds.
We want transparency in how it is proceeding.
Yes, and you want to be closely monitoring what's happening so that you're not presented with a final flourish, but you've understood the process of getting there. So then what happens if it goes wrong? Because you've been involved in the process of getting there as Ofgem. You've seen it all the way through. They've got it wrong, and you've gone along with them. But yet you have this role in regulating them, and ultimately, I think I'm right in what you say, in them being accountable to you. Well, they're just going to turn around to you and say, well, we showed you all the workings out, we told you what we were doing, don't start complaining now.
Oh, yes,
so does it not undermine your role as the regulator? Are you not disempowered and impoverished by this new body?
So I certainly don't think we're impoverished by it. I think you're exactly right in the risk you point out. The way we will tackle this, and again, this has already played out with, this situation already exists with the HND and the current ESO, is it does come back ultimately to very clear upfront transparency. So we cannot, you are absolutely right, we cannot turn around at the end and say, well, we've watched this all the way along, but now we've changed our mind, we don't like it, and we're saying you've underperformed. We must set out upfront very clear expectations of, this product, this point in time, these methodologies, these processes for engagement with industry, with communities and so forth to validate it. Providing you have met those ex-ante terms, you must be deemed to have done a good job. If we don't like the conclusions you reach, if they are based on strong evidence and they are the correct conclusions, that is not a regulation, that's not a failing under regulation. We just have to accept some of the conclusions in this sector are challenging ones.
So the separating out of this new body is to a certain extent mythical. I mean, these responsibilities are responsibilities that you and the government currently have, and the ESO does one thing and everybody else does their bits and so on. But the structure is there, and it's obviously been deemed not to be able to perform in time to deliver what we want, which is why we've come up with a new structure. What I'm trying to get at is what really is new in this new structure and in the governance relations that all of you have with each other?
So I think one of the fundamental changes is at the moment, with all due respect to National Grid, this is a commercial body owned by National Grid, who are also our single biggest network provider. So for me, one of the key fundamental drivers when I look back across the project is simply that the scale and value of the functions it's now being asked to deliver do feel like public interest functions. They don't feel, quite commercial company functions in the same way. And they feel so pertinent to the interests of a network company that it feels very challenging for the rest of the sector to look at the ESO in that world and say, yeah, of course, we're all happy for you to drop the network plan.
Ask you to turn the telescope round in the answer that you've just given and say and tell me what that says about your Ofgem's observations about the way National Grid operates at the moment, which it would sound like is not in the best interests of achieving the delivery we want.
I don't think that's an inference. Certainly, I meant to be taken from what I said. I think it's a recognition that
you said that because the current system with National Grid is you feel because it is a private company and the current arrangements are not satisfactory, and I think you used the words like it feels more suitable that it should be a public body delivering this. So I think there was an implied criticism in what you said.
I think it was a recognition that asking National Grid as an electricity network owner to offer whole systems, so this body will look across electricity and gas, plans for the future of the entire country's network, and expect them to do that, for the country, entirely based on the overall optimum outcome of the country, is asking them to do something that I think they would be the first to say their company was not set up to do. It is not their purpose.
My purpose isn't to denigrate National Grid, so I'll leave that there. Look, how do you expect the centralised strategic network plan to be developed? When is it going to be finalised? And what's the timescale in terms of delivery to actually come up with the necessary network capacity?
What's going to happen over the next few years? We've had the first tranche of planning, project approvals. Those are now moving rapidly into build. That's you'll hear referred to as ASTE. This month we will get a second updated version of that plan that starts to build. That essentially covers the network we need for 2035. My understanding, and with apologies, I will absolutely hand over to the Minister now, is that the government will shortly be commissioning the strategic spatial plan, and I believe that is due to deliver in the financial year 25-26. That the year after that, so using the strategic spatial plan as a basis, the full comprehensive network plan will then come. So that's in the year 26-27. Just checking, busy counting on my fingers. But network build is already happening for the 2030 outcomes, and the plan for the 2035 generation outcomes will come imminently. The plans we're now talking about take us beyond that and pull the full picture of the network together.
Thank you very much. It's been very comprehensive. Minister, I know you wanted to come in and perhaps talk about how the government will exercise its oversight over the NESO.
I think Eleanor's done a pretty good job. She's done a very good job, in fact. We set the strategic policy framework. That's our role. The NESO will have the They're operationally running the system, so that's very much a kind of looking for ministers to make a decision on doing that. They get on with that, and then, as you rightly say, Mr. Gardner, they provide advice to us, and we will shortly be commissioning them to produce the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan. That will be, within to the Commission that we give them. So that's what they will do. So we are ultimately responsible for that. They will use their expertise to come up with it, and Ofgem will be involved in making sure that their business planning, the financing and the rest of it, there's a kind of regulatory role there. So that's the sort of supervisory role they play there. So I think we recognise, this is huge. It's pretty extraordinary thing, and it's been carved out of predominantly out of National Grid to create this overall energy system operator, operating everything, looking across hydrogen, and we all know how important that's going to be. It's right to highlight what a big job it is, and right to give us a good grilling on it. It will change over time. But I think the fundamentals are...
If it goes wrong, sorry to interrupt you, Minister, but if it doesn't work, if we don't get to the targets and the deadlines that government has set, what are the possible sanctions and levers that you as government will have on this? Is it just to abolish it and try again?
There are a whole number of things you can do, but there are... I'm not an expert on all the various ways that we structure government, but things like NICE, for instance, is set up in the health space to make sure that whoever has the most T-shirts outside your window doesn't win the battle for medical spend. We create these expert safe spaces, if you like, in order that that the experts, freed from those political pressures, can come to those sort of arm's length decisions. But ultimately, who carries the can for whether that drug's available to treat children? Precisely. We can agree on that. So these are systems which we're putting in place that we own, and ultimately it'll be ministers sitting in front of Parliament in front of committees like this who are ultimately responsible, and that's how it should be. But there are, I hope the committee agrees, I'd be interested if you didn't, that this kind of setup is probably the right one to allow that expertise to be deployed while we nonetheless assume ultimate responsibility.
Thank you very much, and my apologies to all of our witnesses, Chair, that I have to leave to go to the EFRA Select Committee now, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. And now, Chairman McCrory.
Here I go again. Thank you. Minister, one of the main challenges to the whole build and the whole change and the upgrade to the grid that we've been talking about today is the skill set. Renewables UK have estimated that we're going to need an additional 70,000 people by 2030 to meet the requirements. Can I ask you what analysis your department has done, perhaps in relation with other departments or not, where the skill gaps are, and I suppose that is where the skill gaps are in skills, but also potentially geographically as well?
Across the whole piece?
Across the whole piece. Across
the whole piece. Well, I seem to have had various roles within the energy system since my appointment in September 20... Which year was it? 22. So I did for a while chair the Green Jobs Delivery Group, which itself emerged from memory from another task force, precisely to look at these things. And I think there's 400,000 jobs in the kind of low carbon sector today. The expectation is that's going to grow by 80, 100,000. Depends who you talk to. If you talk to the offshore wind industry, they think they're going to go from around 30-odd thousand today to over 100,000. I think I've seen 110,000 by 2030. You can see how that's not very long away. So it's a huge challenge. That's what the Green Job Delivery Group did, working with industry across multiple sectors to try and get an understanding, to create heat maps, which you will see when the Green Jobs Plan is produced. I think we've committed to publish that in the first half of this year. It's very much partnership with industry looking at these things. And I was at the Phillips 66 refinery on the south bank of the Humber the other day, and they were looking there. They not only process our North Sea oil and gas to turn it into products for cars and vehicles here, but they make coke for EVs and that sort of thing. They're looking at working with the carbon the CCUS cluster, the Viking one nearby. They were looking at investing, and private sector was investing in a local area to move from 100 apprentices a year to 1,000 apprentices a year. And across the country, that's the kind of scale of things that's going on. Of course, we are seeking to bring, while we not only need to do all this stuff, we want more of it to have its supply chain here in the UK. That's both from an energy security point of view, from a delivery security point of view, and also the economic benefit point of view. And that's why at the Autumn Statement 2023, the government committed £960 million for the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, GIGA, to help expand UK manufacturing capacity and strengthen clean energy supply chains across offshore wind, electricity networks, carbon capture, utilisation and storage, hydrogen and nuclear. And at the spring budget the other day, the Chancellor announced an additional £120 million for GIGA, bringing that total to more than £1.1 billion. In January, the government published its Critical Imports and Supply Chain Strategy, which sets out priorities for building supply chain resilience while signalling an intention for increased collaboration with international partners to enhance that global resilience. So there's a whole lot going on. There's the critical mineral strategy as well. And then there are various other bodies which I have previously chaired as well, like the Solar Task Force, which is looking at bringing the 70 gigawatt ambition to life by 2035. That requires a huge increase in the number of installers and the supply chain to deliver that. So it's a big opportunity as well as a big challenge, and I would rather focus on the opportunity than the challenge, but clearly it's one we need to do, and we need to do it at pace, because these opportunities won't be delivered if you haven't got the welders, the project managers and all the rest of it in order to deliver them.
I don't disagree with you about the opportunity. I think that's absolutely the right way to look at it. And I'll come to the wider supply chain in just a moment. But on going back to skills specifically, the Green Jobs Plan that you mentioned that will be out in the first half of this year, does that include the strategies that we're using to get these people into work? So they'll come from different industries. Some will have no skill set at all. Some of them may still be 12-year-olds at secondary school at the moment to get them into the workforce by 2030. Will that document include all of the answers to those sorts of questions? What sort of analysis are you doing around that?
That's the aim, in order to identify across the piece where the hot spots are. As I say, these kind of heat maps, early work I saw on that showed the particular trades that are expected to be, kind of going from sort of green down here to the flashing red up at the top, and the different trades that are expected to be in shortage. I'd say anybody with the word electric in their job title is going to find that there's plenty of work going forward. Electricians of every variety are going to be required for almost, from the electrification of industry to the delivery of so much of this space to hydrogen, carbon capture, a lot. Everything is going to require electrification. So,
excellent. And just going back to the wider supply chain, RWE, for example, has suggested that without direct government intervention, everything becomes a lot more expensive, and that cost is something that they have to push on to the consumer. You mentioned the interventions that the Chancellor has made recently over the last year, or the last half year to year, the 1.1 billion in total now. How is that going to work? How are companies going to see that embedded into making sure they get the results that you want from that funding?
Well, one of the things we did with the Green Job Delivery Group was to engage across Whitehall. So Robert Halfon, the Skills Minister, has been a member of that, as have ministers from other departments. Government support for green skills include skills boot camps, free courses for jobs, higher technical qualifications and apprenticeships. For instance, skills boot camps can be used to train workers in high-demand skills such as electric vehicle charger installation, retrofit and arboriculture. There are already more than 10 T-levels and 200-plus apprenticeship standards relevant to net zero that are in place, with more construction and digital standards coming online in 2025. And to inform the Green Jobs Plan, the Green Job Delivery Group undertook workforce assessments, forecasting labour demands for specific sectors for the delivery of net zero and nature targets. We've also announced a 2-year £50 million apprenticeship pilot across 3 growth sectors, one of which is green, and that'll cover 13 key in-demand standards, including nuclear technician, pipe welder, and electrical power networks engineer, which will all be critical occupations to the UK's green transition in sectors such as nuclear, CCUS, and offshore wind. 2021, DFE, with whom I say we work closely, launched free courses for jobs, which gives adults the chance to access free level 3 qualifications in priority sectors like engineering, construction and manufacturing. And that free courses for jobs has proved popular, with data suggesting more than 49,000 enrolments being reported between April 2021 and July 2023. We're working, across the piece, and one of the reasons of pulling it all together into this green jobs plan is it will, hopefully be socialised. That's a ghastly expression, but anyway, with the FE colleges and others right around the country and schools, because I know from having previously chaired the Education Committee, young people don't know what they don't know. So getting that information out there, making sure that the careers advisors in schools are able to share the opportunity and bring that alive so that people know the kind of courses they can go on in order to access these jobs. But it's a big opportunity, and it's, I think the particular concentrations of opportunity are going to be in the areas that we seek to level up. So one of the great things, if we do unlock this in the right way, that we make sure that levelling up isn't an aspiration, it's actually something genuinely delivered in areas that previously felt left behind as they move from high carbon to low carbon.
That's good news. And can I ask you to comment just a little bit more about the wider resilience of supply chains and how much you feel government intervention is important to ensure that supply chains are resilient? Is that something that you're in favour of? If so, to what extent? And if not, why not? And how else would people get to how else would the supply chain reach the resilience it is required?
Well, of course, a lot of the resilience in our system has been supported by government action. There's been a wide range of schemes, notably the Contracts for Difference, of course, which provide that, when you have to build everything up front and you rely on a long return over time, the cost of capital is critical. That's why giving guarantees of certain levels of income have allowed that to be to help support our supply chain. And we're looking for Contracts for Difference to have something we're now going to call industrial rewards. So another way of encouraging reliable supply chain support. The Offshore Wind Manufacturing Investment Scheme, OMIS, and the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund. These are just some of the projects alongside GIGA, which we're using to encourage more of that supply chain to be resilient and ideally, obviously, based in the UK. And on networks, the department recently commissioned the trade body BEMA to convene a supply chain council, and that started at the beginning of this year, as we committed to in the Transmission Acceleration Action Plan, and that's going to be an ongoing forum. So we're seeking to make sure that government across Whitehall and industry talk together, share the data, and we don't have surprises. And then everyone can plan, they can invest, and companies like Phillips 66, as I talked about, along with other local partners, can likewise maximise the number of apprenticeships and turn these supply chains into real opportunities for local people. And
are you confident then, or is government confident that the trajectory that we're on, given the interventions that you've just mentioned, we are on track to meet those targets with a robust supply chain, or do you feel that there are additional interventions that government might have to make over the next 6 years or so?
Well, we'll keep talking to industry, and it's something we'll keep under review. But so far, as you know, we have made a quite remarkable transformation. When we did our first auction for offshore wind, who knew that we were not only going to be able to lead the world in the development of that technology, but actually massively drive down the price while we were at it. So, we've cut our emissions more than any other major economy on the planet. And that's primarily, since 2010, been driven by the removal of coal from our system and its replacement by renewables. And we've seen a lot of jobs created while we're at it. So the economy has grown, emissions are down, and the world is changing, committing to net zero. And you're seeing with the carbon border adjustment mechanism legislation in Europe, the fact that the Chancellor's committed that we're going to do the same, the signals across the world are there. And if we keep on leading, keep greening our operations, we can not only do the right thing, but we can be more economically prosperous as a result.
One final question, and it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but what other challenges, or do you foresee that perhaps we haven't covered in that set of questions that you think are still going to be a challenge for government or a challenge for the industry to get to where we are?
Well, the grid, which we rightly focus on, if you don't have the facilitating infrastructure, all this cool generation is not going to come at the right price. What we need, planning, the whole. That's why we had the transition, the transmission action plan, the connections action plan, and we're keeping on working at it. And we've got all the partners coming forward with more ideas still to sort that out. But I was at a recent meeting, and I was pleased to hear, amidst all the noise around the queue, and the chairman started with that, I said, well, despite all that and the fact that the queue's growing faster than we're managing to make the changes and the milestones point, can we, all other things being equal, decarbonise our system and get our targets fulfilled for 2035? To which the answer I was given back was yes.
And are you confident that we are very, in comparison with other European countries or other like-minded countries, we're on track, ahead, behind, about level?
Well, I think we've cut our emissions more than anyone else. We're ahead, and the aim is to stay ahead. But of course, the biggest challenge on climate change isn't a sort of a race by yourself. We've got the whole world. Our biggest challenge isn't the UK. Our biggest challenge is getting the rest of the world to make sure they follow. That's why COP26 was so important. We went from 30% of global GDP covered by net zero pledges to more than 90%. That's why COP28 was important, when everyone focused on the tripling and the doubling numbers there, pledges. Actually, the world committed to 1.5 aligned, all greenhouse gas, economy-wide, nationally determined contributions for 2035, and we're expecting that in less than a year's time from countries in February next year, ahead of the Belém COP in Brazil. So, I think we're in a good place.
My question, sorry, I wasn't explaining myself, but are we on track or behind or in front when it comes to a resilient supply chain, upskilling the population, those sorts of targets? Do you feel confident that we're about right, or? It's challenging.
Because the whole world's doing this at once, we're 4 or 5 times more than we've done in the last 30 years. We're trying to do in the next 6 just on networks alone. And other people are doing it at the same time. So from HVDC cables to transformers to all the other bits of kit, there's real pressure in the system. But our system is pretty good. And when you talk to our 3 transmission operators or the local connections companies, actually they're in a good place, and the work that we've been put in over the recent years, for instance, the ASTI process, which we work closely with the regulator on, they changed their approach. That's allowed multi-billion pound contracts to be signed and agreed. So it's challenging, but I think we're probably in a reasonable place, and I expect that to continue as we have our transitional comprehensive strategic network plan, as well as the SSEP. So all these plans and all these damn acronyms, but it is a coordinated set of work across the piece, and I think we're probably in a good place.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So we've got 2 sets of questions, 10 minutes each. And Chris, I know you want to come in on that, but can you add that to your set of questions, and we'll go to Caroline Lucas first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the question for the Minister. Given the government's target for zero carbon power by 2035, to what extent has government been investing in the batteries and the flexible technologies and the storage and electrification to offset the need for new gas power? And what further plans do you have for the development of those technologies so we can really squeeze gas out of the system?
Well, thank you. Electricity storage can enable us to use energy more flexibly and decarbonise our energy system cost effectively. So, for instance, by balancing the system at lower cost, by maximising the usable output from intermittent low-carbon generation such as solar and wind, and deferring or avoiding the need for costly network upgrades and new generation capacity. So we recognise a variety of storage technologies will be needed to achieve net zero, including technologies that can deploy at different scales and provide output for different durations, such as lithium-ion battery storage, pumped hydropower storage, as well as emerging technologies, including liquid air, energy storage, and flow batteries. And we're facilitating the deployment of electricity storage at all scales through the joint government and Ofgem Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan. This includes the longer duration energy storage demonstration, the loads competition, and that aims to accelerate the commercialisation of innovative, first-of-a-kind, longer duration energy storage technologies which provide grid flexibility.
Are there any timetables to any, or any kind of figures that would indicate what kind of acceleration there is going behind that? Because I appreciate there are a whole range of technologies out there that you're pursuing to a greater or lesser extent. But to the extent that we need it to be, really having a step change in the investment and so forth, do you have anything that would capture some of the speed, the acceleration, the change, the level of change that we're seeing in those things?
Well, today there's more than 31 gigawatt hours of electricity storage operational in Great Britain, and that's made up of 27 gigawatt hours of pumped hydro storage and just under 5 gigawatt hours of newer grid-scale lithium-ion battery storage. And there's a strong and growing electricity storage planning pipeline representing nearly 51 gigawatts of storage. And that's 48 gigawatts of battery storage and 3 gigawatts of pumped hydro storage. So those things are coming through. We're aware of approximately 20 LDES projects under development consideration in GB. And together these are estimated to provide more than 200 gigawatt hours of storage and 10 gigawatts of power capacity.
Do you have targets for the different elements of that plan, is what I'm trying to get at? You've explained what the status quo is in terms of where we're at right now, and then you've given a big figure for how we would like to be. But what I don't see is a kind of trajectory for the different technologies that would potentially at least help us squeeze that gas off the system.
If I could come in, Minister, we've recently closed a consultation on a potential cap and floor support scheme for long duration electricity storage.
It wasn't terribly long though, was it? It was only about 35 hours? It's
6 hours plus, so we're looking at mostly pumped hydro, but also some newer technologies.
Look at something that's for
so
a longer
that's on the hydrogen side. We have been also consulting on the hydrogen storage scheme. Apologies, let me find the...
That's the basic answer, Ms. Lucas, is that hydrogen, the technologies do not exist at commercial scale yet to provide the balance. That's why, as part of the Stage 2 consultation for the review of electricity market arrangements, which we announced today, that we're looking at having new gas-fired generation, which will be used less and less often, but to provide that kind of insurance and backup. But it's hydrogen that we see as a particularly, to provide a vector for holding energy that then can be converted back into electricity when we need it. The development of hydrogen storage infrastructure represents the critical next step in the growth of the hydrogen economy, and that will require overcoming the chicken and egg problem of needing to develop new production and use cases in tandem with balancing supply and demand. That's why we've separated in our kind of business model approach. We're looking to incentivize hydrogen production without them having to worry about whether there's demand for it, and hydrogen, second piece would be the transport infrastructure, and the third is storage. And we're looking to do those three pieces, bring them together, because we need, as Germany and other countries are in the same position, made the same analysis, come to the same conclusion, that hydrogen is the missing piece, and we are seeking to drive that forward and develop it.
10 minutes, of which I probably only have 7 minutes now. But thank you for that. But I suppose what I'm still not particularly hearing is a robust plan with amounts and dates and so forth. And what I also didn't hear at all, I think this afternoon in any way, is anything about demand reduction, and in terms of demand for energy. And it just surprises me that we're not pursuing more on that, because the obvious way of not requiring more and more supply is to be doing more on the demand side, and we still don't have something as basic as the comprehensive street-by-street home insulation programme that could help us really drive down demand. But I wanted to ask you about the fact that the CCC are clear that there should be no new unabated gas plants built after 2030. What's the timeline for the development of the new gas power stations that you've announced today? And could you say any more about the plans to abate them? I don't think it was in the Secretary of State's speech, but how confident are you in the plans to abate them, given that we know that at the minute that technology doesn't exist at scale and size and speed in order to do that? And what is plan B if it continues not to be deployable at scale?
We've already passed laws requiring new gas plants to be built carbon capture ready, and running hours for gas plants will continue to reduce as we roll out more renewables. Sorry?
Just being ready doesn't help that much. I mean, there's a lovely analogy. You know, my driveway could be Porsche ready, but it doesn't mean to say that a Porsche is just going to arrive on my drive anytime soon. So I just want to get at what's plan B if we don't have CCS at speed and scale.
Well, we are seeking to develop CCUS at speed and scale. Like hydrogen, you know, the closer you get to net zero, the more you know, challenging it becomes. But our pathway, the Climate Change Committee's pathway, requires carbon capture. You talk to the IEA or anyone else. We need carbon capture and we need hydrogen, and we are seeking to develop both. And we need to make those work, and we will.
I admire your confidence. The CCC's 2023 progress report to Parliament made clear, and I quote, that given short lead times, rapid deployment of onshore wind and solar could have helped to mitigate dependence on imported gas during the fossil fuel crisis. And yet, despite the government's policy changes, no new proposals for public wind farms were submitted for planning permission in England last year. What are you doing to address that failure? Because it's not only that, we know as well that only 7 applications were submitted for onshore wind turbines for the whole of last year in England, and all of them were replacements for existing turbines, or they were for private sites for individual industries. That number was even lower. It was 10 applications, I think, in 2022. So it doesn't feel that like transformational change is happening there.
Well, in September 2023, the government announced changes to planning policy for onshore wind in England to ensure local authorities can respond flexibly to suitable opportunities for onshore wind energy. And the changes broaden the ways in which local authorities can identify suitable locations for onshore wind and ensure that local authorities can take a more balanced approach when considering the views of communities. So the changes we've made will take some time to filter through the system. It takes typically between 1 to 2 years to develop and then submit a planning application. But we want to keep the recently updated national planning policy specific to onshore wind under review, and that's why we've committed to publishing a report on progress in the next 12 months, drawing on the data collected through the Renewable Energy Planning Database.
One last question, if I might, Chair. Last week, a record budget was announced for the 6th contracts for difference allocation round, including 800 million, I think, for offshore wind. But industry are warning, as I'm sure you know, that this may not be enough to meet the government's own renewables target. We've had Renewables UK calculating that AR6 may only manage to produce, or rather to procure, between 3 gigawatts and 6 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity, when around 10 would likely be needed to plug the shortfall created by last year's auction failure. How are you planning to close that gap that Renewables UK have identified?
It's worth noting that 800 million is the highest ever budget for offshore wind, 4 times the budget available to offshore wind in our previous auction. And budgets are set based on a range of factors, including an assessment of the pipeline of projects that could participate in the auction. And this includes consideration of which projects may have been eligible when the decision was made. But once all applications have been reviewed and the volume of eligible applications is more certain, the Secretary of State has the option to revise the budget upwards. And that will be somewhere between May and early August that she will have the opportunity to do that. So
that would be seriously considered, if necessary.
Well, it always is. It is. The budget is very much, we seek to ensure that there's competitive tension, because if everybody just knows their project's going to get through, then effectively the administrative strike price, the top price that we'll pay, is what everyone will get. So you look at the pipeline and then you come up with a budget Now, projects, as well as joining the queue, can also drop out. They can, there are various elements that can happen. But so we have to make that judgment. And we've done that year by year. We've had a pretty consistent methodology and approach by the team. I know we didn't get any offshore wind in that last window, but one of the reasons to go into an annual window is recognizing that when you get that if you get volatility in prices, then you're not always going to hit the sweet spot. But we will look at the pipeline in that window when it comes to setting the final budget, and we can therefore build it most appropriately.
Thank you, Chris Grady.
Thank you. Minister, just to take you back a moment to what you said about the supply chain, what do you think? I mean, there's clearly a vast amount of stuff that is going to be needed to deliver this. You rightly said there's going to be huge competition around the world because everybody is trying to do the same. And most of what we're talking about is not manufactured in the UK at the moment. So if you are to look across this sector and identify priorities to try and secure inward investment into the UK to manufacture some of this stuff here, what do you and your team think are the highest priorities, the bits of kit that we can realistically get, and from where?
I don't think I have a list of those in front of me right now. It's where we have competitive advantage, isn't it? That's that number one thing. And we can see rising protectionism around the world, and green protectionism is just as bad as any other. And what we want is we're seeking to green our system at the lowest possible cost. And if we weren't so open to international investment, we wouldn't have done it. And one of the really terrifying things of, were there to be a Labour government, is that Keir Starmer wants to make Ed Miliband, not the market, do this. I mean, effectively, they're going to plan to abolish the contracts for difference, which have helped us lead the world, and have Ed Miliband running some state-run quango, which is going to do it. It's not even going to have 28 billion, it will or it won't, I don't know, to do it with. So that's what's really scary. So we've got to stay open to trade. Look, what Giga is about is not trying to match the cash credits of the United States with IRA, who, because of their governmental challenges, they can't regulate properly. We can regulate, and we can make suitable interventions. That's what Giga's about. So I haven't got, sorry, it's a very long-winded non-answer to your question, but we work closely with industry precisely to do that. So on offshore wind, we work closely with industry there precisely to identify those areas those specific areas where we are most likely to be competitive, and we're doing similar work with the solar task force, because industry is the best one when we bring together the supply chain and the developers and the other players, and then make sure that you quietly work at it and look at it and we work closely. We use outside consultants to help us understand the market and prices, and we also we've built up trust with many developers to share some of the data with us precisely so we can understand what the market really looks like. There's no point us trying to produce something here which is not competitive globally.
But given what you said about the critical supply chain, critical components, you must surely have a programme together with the Trade Department of saying, look, these are the things we really need to get, manufactured in Asia or wherever, that we need to get into the UK. There must be such a programme to identify the key things that we want to get into the UK, the key bits of inward investment that we want, and a sales pitch to try and get them.
Well, that's what we work very closely with DBT on, as I say, and with industry bodies, precisely to understand any vulnerabilities, and then look to ensure that we can develop industries in this country which have the chance of being competitive in the long term. But we're an open trading power. We don't look to source everything here. We're not we're not looking for energy autarky.
But I'd be very disappointed if you and trade ministers weren't saying, right, we need these crucial bits of kit that are currently manufactured in Thailand or wherever it may be. We will have a serious engagement operation with the businesses that do this to try and sell them the benefits of investing in the UK. Can you reassure the committee you're doing that?
Yes, well, part of it is it's the pipeline, isn't it? That's what industry wants. They want to know that they're going to have the orders. And if they're going to invest in a new factory, they're going to have to see, confidence they're going to be able to have a ideally domestic reliable market 12, 14 years from now. That's what the ASTI programme was about in networks. That's what the Comprehensive Strategic Network Plan is all about. The SSEP, sending these signals, having these long-term commitments so that we can see more investments coming into the country.
I'll take you back to the issue of the gas power stations. Is there a strategy? I mean, you talked about them being ready to migrate to other fuels, but is there actually a strategy in place against today's announcement to achieve that?
Sorry?
Well, is there a strategy? You're saying any new gas power stations got to be able to be migrated to another form of fuel, but does the government have a strategy to move away from fossil gas to other whether it's hydrogen or whatever in these power stations?
Well, yeah, we're looking to develop carbon capture and we're looking to develop hydrogen. And we are pushing forward with them both as quickly as we can. When I remember 2003, the then Labour government said that there was urgent need for carbon capture and storage. Well, this government is actually now delivering it and has come up with £20 billion to get us going and get these tracks developed. But it is expensive and it is challenging. But we see no route, as I said to Ms. Lucas, we see no route to net zero without carbon capture and hydrogen. So we've got to make them work because I'm not sure. I mean, we're supporting things like direct air capture and other approaches as well. But fundamentally, right now, we and our partners all see these technologies as being critical to doing it. And if we can get it right, carbon capture, for instance, not only may we be able to take these power stations and take their emissions and store those in the long term, we may be able to offer the service to our European neighbours as well, because we have I think 78 gigatons of storage in the North Sea, potentially more than we've emitted since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So that's quite exciting, commercially as well as environmentally.
I guess what the committee is trying to establish is, have we got to the point where there is an actual transition plan in development, which, clearly companies that are looking to invest in non-fossil fuel generating plants will be taking their own investment decisions based on a number of factors, including what government policy is. Clearly, you've got the right aspiration in terms of migrating away from the use of fossil fuels when it's possible to do so, but have we actually reached the point where there is a strategy plan with milestones to achieve that?
We've set out, in the Powering Up Britain plans we set out last year, we set out the most comprehensive and detailed plans of any economy on Earth, but many of these pieces are all moving together, so none of them, it isn't definitive how exactly what the pathway to 2035 and beyond will look like. But that is exactly what my department does on a daily basis, and then in these in its updates, putting together the plans and sending signals to industry so that we can see these developments. But once we get track one properly up and running of carbon capture and storage, we've got the hydrogen allocation round one. Once we see that developed as well, these steps will make it easier and easier to come up with more definitive and rather better answers than the ones I'm providing to your entirely appropriate questions.
And so can I just take you back quickly to the question of storage? There are clearly two different sets of need around storage. There is the day-to-day, hour-to-hour stuff. And there is also the question of, if we are heavily dependent on wind, for example, we have long periods of time when there is no wind. So we will need long-term storage as well. Who is going to be responsible for deciding the balance between long and short-term storage?
Ultimately, government sets policy, and we'll, as we discussed earlier, we're ultimately responsible for making sure the lights stay on. So
that's policy for the long term, but in terms of practical decision, who will be deciding in the future we need to put more hydrogen into a storage bank in case there is no wind in the next 3 months, or we need to be burning hydrogen instead of gas now that we can do so in part?
Well, it takes us back to the NESO.
It will be NESO.
They've got electricity, gas and hydrogen responsibilities. We don't want to overburden them, but they will be helping advise us in order to deliver the policy outcomes which we will set. precisely in line with what you're suggesting, Mr. Grayling.
And in terms of long-term storage, you're leaving that to the market. Is that the sensible way to do that? Does government have any role at all in planning adequate long-term storage?
We're hardly leaving it to the market. I would say, the carbon capture will allow. That will be still using fossil fuels, but that's a form of storage. But when you take the storage, then we're looking at that and seeking to develop the hydrogen. As I say, the different parts of the three parts of the hydrogen production system, all of which are getting government support, and looking at what kind of storage capacity we will need as that develops. And that, again, is going to be a matter for government ultimately to decide, albeit advised by NESO and others.
Because the business realities of short and long term for hydrogen, for example, are very different. And so there'll probably need to be some kind of mechanism in place to incentivise long term, I would assume. Yes, it depends on the business model at the time, and that's precisely what we're looking at, is all three components, as I say, production, transport and storage, all of which need, in order to get those going, need some government guarantees, and that's what we're working on. We're working on the business models precisely in order to engender that and provide the investor confidence to develop appropriately. And then the last thing, why is it taking so long to deliver half-hourly settlement for domestic customers?
That's a very good question. Emily will now answer it.
Thank you. It's a really important project. Ofgem are actually leading on it, so I don't know, Eleanor, if you want to come in.
In all honesty, I will have to give a fairly high-level answer. But I understand that, firstly, obviously, it's intricately connected to the rollout of smart meters, where you will have seen a number of actions by Ofgem around supplier delivery of smart meter rollout. So that is one area that is very much in front of us as a regulator. And the other side of it is essentially around the putting in place of all the necessary technical underpinnings. But you need a sufficient market saturation of smart meters to get the meaningful benefits from it.
Thank you. Just picking up on that, Eleanor, could you write to us and tell us how the rollout of smart meters is going, and give us a sort of profiling of how the progression of rollout across domestic and business customers?
Yes, of course. So essentially you're looking for how has smart meters rolled out up till now, and targets and expectations for the future. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Minister, I've just got a final question for you. As usual, you've demonstrated your confidence in the system over which you are responsible, but the scale of the challenge facing the country in order to achieve decarbonisation by 2035 is very significant. We've got to triple generation capacity over the next 10 years. We've got to install 4 times as much transmission network over the next 7 years that we have installed in the previous, since 1990. We've already established in our conversation today that there are skills shortages acknowledged, there are supply chain issues, there are connection issues with the grid, which you're working on accelerating, but much of that is down to changing the planning system, which we know takes a long time. So the question is, in the face of all of those challenges, and without a detailed delivery plan, we've got aspirational targets, but not an itemised plan to deliver all these different components. How can you be so confident that the electricity network will be decarbonised in 10 years, 10 months or whatever it is, till the end of 2035?
Well, our record on generation, I think, is pretty strong, and talking to investors, the appetite is there. The UK is seen as a particularly attractive destination to invest, and the CFD, notwithstanding the need for further improvements, has provided the really important way of generating that. At which point you then have the big issue of the grid, the work that Nick Windsor did, and I know he's appeared before you, I think, more than once, with the transmission action plan, with the connections action plan, the continuing work that's going on. I'm confident that we can get the green generation. You've got a couple of elements which are still a bit nascent, which is CCUS and hydrogen, and we need those as part and parcel of what we do. But I don't see why we shouldn't do it. And we've said that it's an ambition to decarbonise the system by 2035, subject to security of supply. I can't remember whether it's and affordability, so a couple of old get-outs there. But actually, I think we can do this. In the meetings I'm having with other players in the system say that they too think that we can do it, and our record to date is second to none. To think that nearly 40% of our electricity came from coal in 2012, nearly 40%. And to move by October this year, it's zero. I mean, it's quite remarkable. And the 7% renewables to, well over 40% today and growing fast. Why shouldn't we have a can-do attitude? I hope I'm not glib or complacent. I spend, with my officials, we spend every day working flat out dealing with these challenges, some of which are stark. But I believe we can do it, and we should approach this in a spirit of optimism. And, as I say, with things like CBAMs coming on as well and the rest of the world following on our pathway, the really exciting thing is that decarbonised, largely electrified system in the mid-2030s could be the absolute platform for an industrial renaissance in this country, because people talk about us having offshored certain manufacturing in the past, in the distant past. There's a real opportunity for an awful lot of production to come back to the UK. I see this not only as being the right thing to do, but actually potentially restoring the UK to the position as the preeminent industrial and economic power in Europe. And if we can do that, there's no better example we can set the world than to do the right thing, decarbonise our systems, lower our emissions, and prove that you can get richer while doing it, because that will make others want to follow in our path.
Thank you. That's a very good peroration. I'm just going to puncture it in a tiny way.
In a big way.
By asking whether, perhaps I'll ask Eleanor and Emily to give a view as to whether you think there is clarity as to the responsibility for monitoring and pursuing progress along the journey that the Minister has so eloquently described, as between the Department, Ofgem and NESO. Does everybody know what their role is and who is monitoring who?
Would you like to answer first?
Eleanor, would you like to try?
I think there is good clarity on the role of the regulator. So our role within this is very much the network delivery, making sure that the regulatory frameworks are there and the accountability by the network companies is there. So yes, I think there is clear accountability there, and in terms of the market and supplier oversight, I think the role of the NESO in providing that technical expertise, that advisory, I think is reasonably clear and is becoming clearer as it goes towards day one. I think possibly the one other organisation I would mention, in addition to the triumvirate you have, is the CCC, who I think also has an important role.
Thank you. And Elaine, from a departmental point of view, are you clear where responsibility lies in delivering this programme?
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Eleanor's said. I think from a department point of view, we see NESO and Ofgem both as important partners in what we're trying to do to deliver energy ambitions. We've set out in the strategy and policy statement, which was recently published in Parliament, that applies to both Ofgem and NESO in carrying out their tasks. And then there'll be a further, more detailed framework document, which is more about roles and responsibilities, that will get published once we've formally set up NESO later this year. So I think we're confident that the roles should be clear.
Good. Well, I think that concludes our session. I'd like to thank the Minister, Graham Stuart, for your confident appearance here, as usual again today, for Emily Bourne from the Department and Eleanor Warburton from Ofgem. Order, order. Thank you very much.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.